Have you ever noticed how the modern world conditions you to talk more and more, to explain yourself all the time, to prove who you are to people who aren't even really listening, as if your value were tied to your ability to convince, react, fight for space with words? But what if I told you that true power is not in explaining yourself, but in keeping quiet? That unshakable confidence, the kind that changes environments with just your presence, is not born from shouting, but from silence. There is a type of silence that is not absence. It is concentrated presence, a presence so solid that it intimidates, disorients, reveals. A silence that is not an escape, but absolute control of one's own energy. When you learn to be silent with intention, you are not omitting yourself, you are commanding. You are choosing not to react, not because you fear confrontation, but because you have overcome it. And it is in this internal space of control that your old identity, weak, reactive, anxious for validation, begins to dissolve. In this video, we'll reveal a dangerous mental hack. Dangerous for your ego, for the fragile image you've built to please others, for the old beliefs that keep you small. A technique that, if used consciously, can kill your old identity and give way to a new you. A you that doesn't ask for respect and it emanates, that doesn't need to be understood. Get ready, because from now on, nothing about you will remain the same. Long before modern psychology attempted to explain human behavior with formulas and statistics, there were traditions that understood the mind as a battlefield between visible and invisible forces. The ancient Greeks called this the psyche, not just the mind, but the soul in motion. And within this soul, it was said, lived both the divine spark and the shadow of fear, doubt, and submission. Among the thinkers who delved most deeply into this mystery, Friedrich Nietzsche stood out as a voice that echoes to this day. His concept of the Übermensch, or beyond man, was more than a philosophical utopia. It was a call to overcome herd morality, emotional dependence, and the need for external approval. The true being, for Nietzsche, was one who did not react on impulse but created by choice, who lived not to please but to express his most essential truth. And this essence does not shout. It watches, it waits, it knows. Nietzsche understood that the common man lives imprisoned by his fragile identity, a character constructed to be accepted by society, but disconnected from his real strength. This character needs to be destroyed, not with violence but with presence, with silence, with the deliberate refusal to continue playing the game of reactivity that the world proposes. Eastern traditions also point to this same path. Taoism speaks of the power of Wu Wei, acting without effort, without struggle, without the need to impose oneself. In Zen Buddhism, the master is not the one who speaks the most, but the one who remains silent when everyone expects an answer. Silence here is a tool for transformation. Carl Jung, in turn, reminds us that he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. This awakening is only possible when we break the unconscious cycle of automatic reactions, and this begins with a silent choice, not to react, not to give in, not to justify. Thus, across centuries and cultures, one truth remains. True power does not need to announce itself. It makes itself felt, and anyone who dares to be silent in order to find themselves begins to kill, little by little, the weak identity that the world has built for them, and awakens to the most authentic version of themselves. Imagine your mind as a grand theater, where the characters of the ego act out their daily lives. The one who wants to please, the one who fears rejection, the one who seeks acceptance, the one who reacts to defend himself. These characters are not you. They are versions constructed to survive in the world, created based on experiences, traumas, fears, and praise. But behind the curtain, there is something else. A silent, observant, intact presence. This is your essence. And to access it, you have to dismantle the stage. The most dangerous brain hack, the one that kills your old identity, starts with a radical break, stopping reacting automatically. Reaction is programming. It is conditioning. Whenever you react, you are not making a decision. You are just reliving a pattern. And every pattern repeated without awareness becomes a prison. Most people live inside this prison, calling it personality. But the secret lies in the spaces between stimulus and response. The moment something hurts you, provokes you, accuses you, and you do not respond, you stop, you observe, you breathe, and in the meantime, something extraordinary happens. The old self falls apart, and the new begins to emerge. It's not immediate, it's like peeling off an old skin. Uncomfortable, painful, but necessary. Nietzsche knew this when he wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." And this chaos is not external. It lives in the internal battles between who you were trained to be and who you were born to be. The weak identity, the one that needs to be accepted, that runs away from discomfort, that explains itself to everyone, does not survive conscious silence, because silence forces the mind to face itself. It forces the ego to realize that it is not in control, and that is precisely where self-transformation begins, when you stop explaining your truth and start simply inhabiting it. When your presence says everything, even when your mouth says nothing. This hack doesn't give you a new mask, it rips them all off, and in their place, it puts something the world doesn't know how to deal with. Someone who doesn't need approval to exist. Someone who simply is, and this presence is frightening. As you silence the old identity, a new structure begins to emerge, not built by external influences, but sculpted from within. And herein lies a truth that is rarely spoken. True confidence is not the kind that needs to be displayed. It is the kind that emanates from someone who has confronted their own darkness and remained whole. Most people confuse confidence with performance, loud voice, commanding posture, quick responses, but these are just noises trying to drown out insecurity. True confidence does not need to prove anything. It rests within itself like a silent mountain. And this silence is not absence, it is density, it is presence, it is energy that does not fragment itself trying to please. The moment you stop living to be validated, your energy field changes. You no longer bow to the opinions of others. You do not dissolve in order to be accepted. And surprisingly, this is when you become magnetic. Because people sense when they are in the presence of someone who does not need them to exist. Someone who is self-sufficient, who knows themselves, that is anchored in something greater than the image. But that takes courage, because killing the old you is like losing a skin that has always protected you. Even if it was a prison, it was familiar, and the new you, the real you, is still unexplored territory. That is why many retreat. They go back to wearing the old suits of approval. They repeat the old speeches, because freedom scares those who have spent their lives in captivity. But if you can endure the discomfort, if you can sustain the silence, if you can observe the chaos without trying to protect yourself from it, something starts to happen. You start to inhabit a new frequency. One where clarity replaces doubt, where centering replaces fear, and where confidence emerges not as an imposition, but as an inevitable consequence of someone who has finally returned home within themselves. And it is here that the old identity dies once and for all, not with a scream, but with the imperturbable silence of someone who has found themselves again, and no longer intends to abandon themselves. Transforming the way you perceive yourself and shedding the fragile identity that has haunted you for so long is not just a change in thinking, it is a spiritual discipline. And it begins with small rituals, invisible choices, and moments that no one sees. The first practice is intentional silence. Set aside at least 10 minutes a day to simply be with yourself, without music, without screens, without distractions. Sit with your spine straight, eyes closed, and breathe. When thoughts come, just observe. Don't fight. This simple act of not reacting already begins to retrain your nervous system. It is the training of presence, and it is in presence that the old self loses its hold. The second practice is radical self-observation. Throughout the day, pay attention to the moments when you feel the need to justify yourself, to please, to avoid conflict, or to fit in. When this happens, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, who in me is trying to be accepted right now? Is this impulse coming from my truth or from my fear? This questioning creates a space, and in that space, the freedom to choose differently is born. The third practice is the gesture of silent affirmation. Before entering a difficult conversation, in a challenging environment, or even when waking up in the morning, declare internally, I don't need to be understood, I just need to be true. This changes everything, because when you align with your truth, the world begins to adjust to your new vibrational field, not the other way around. And finally, cultivate the power of non-response. Not everything needs an explanation. Not every attack deserves a defense. When you remain silent by choice and not out of fear, you force the world to reposition itself. Your lack of reaction becomes a mirror, and many cannot stand what they see reflected there. These practices are not magic formulas. They are keys. And each time you use them, a new door within you opens. The old identity loses strength, and little by little, you begin to inhabit what you have always been. Pure presence, living clarity, silent power. True confidence does not come from the loudest voice or the most refined logic. It emerges from the silence of those who no longer need to prove anything. When you stop responding by reflex, when you let go of the addiction to being understood, and anchor yourself in the sacred space of non-reaction, something within you reorganizes. The old self, sustained by fears, expectations, and external validations, begins to crumble, and in its place a new presence arises, firm, clean, unshakable. Nietzsche did not write for those who sought comfort. He wrote for those who dared to become. His concept of the Übermensch is not a distant ideal, but a call to transcend inherited programming, to stop living as a reflection of the collective and start creating from the essence. Silence then ceases to be a defense and becomes a declaration of existence. Now the final question is not whether you will react less, but whether you are ready to be more. More whole, more present, more you. Not the one shaped by trauma and expectations, but the one who has survived the noise and chosen to dwell in the center, where everything is quiet and everything is true. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to remember who they are. And in the comments write, my presence speaks for me, because from now on, you don't need to say anything else. Your vibration already says it all.